Are you someone that suffers nausea, insomnia, anxiety, or irritable bowel syndrome, or inflammatory bowel disease? Well, this is the episode for you. We might have something that could help, something that could support these conditions. This episode is on medicinal cannabis. Yes, medicinal cannabis. We are giving you the latest insight around medicinal cannabis. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today on the show, we have Harry Baird, who's the General Manager of Atlus Group. So Atlus provides convenient access to specialist medical advice and cannabis treatment. And Harry's going to be sharing with us the latest insights around medicinal cannabis, its uses, how it works, where you can access it, and essentially the not so good things or the side effects that probably unspoken about. He shares everything, all warts and all. So join me for this fantastic discussion with Harry on me&my Health Up. Welcome, Harry Baird, on the me&my Health Up podcast show. How are you today?
I'm good, Anthony. Thanks for having me. How are you?
Fantastic. So great you could join us. And where are you joining us from?
The rainy Sunshine Coast today. It is horrible.
Dear. It's such a beautiful part of the world, but...
Yes, no, don't get me wrong. We had the last 2 weekends were about 32 degrees and it was beautiful. But yeah, it's just, it's come down and with a bit of rain. So it's not all doom and gloom. I quite like it.
Yeah, fantastic. And please share with the listeners how you've arrived at what you're doing today as the General Manager of Atlus Group.
Yeah, for sure. So it's been a long sort of journey, and it started from actually trying cannabis for the first time when I was around 18, 19. I was a professional snowboard instructor for a while, and before that I was a skater. So my first test of or trial of cannabis was at a skate park, funny enough. But after that, it sort of just made me wonder why we had been so, I guess, indulged with all this information about drugs and why it was so bad, and that you would make bad decisions and you would end up homeless. And, it was very negative connotations that sort of surrounded cannabis. And I never really quite understood it. But it wasn't until I started traveling between New Zealand, America, and Canada as a snowboarder, where I met so many like-minded individuals who were successful and were also cannabis users. Obviously, being in America and Canada, there are dispensaries and there's a lot less stigma over there, especially in Canada. And it wasn't until my trainer mentioned that he used CBD for sleep. And back then, I didn't understand what CBD meant. I thought cannabis was something that you smoked and that was it. It's sort of, I had the same relevance to alcohol. It's like you drank it and you got drunk, right? Like I didn't understand the whole compounds and everything to cannabis. So when he said that, and because when I was on the mountain in Canada, we had a dispensary in our local town. So I went down and signed up and, I went in and said, hey, look, like, what can I get? And the guy sort of looked at me. He's like, anything you want. Like, you just have to give us money. I was like, no, I understand that, but what is there? So he sort of ran through a couple of things, and he ran through about sativa and indica and the different effects that can give. And if you don't want to be high, you can look at CBD. And I said, look, I'd love to grab some CBD stuff. And he goes, cool. Well, we have gummies and oils. And I said, I'll take gummies. So I found that during the seasons that I did in Canada, I found my recovery and my sleep to be so much better than what I did when I was in New Zealand, obviously because New Zealand doesn't have the same laws. There's no CBD products, there's no cannabis products, so it's all illegal, right? So 7 years of travel really made me understand cannabis just through my own intuition and just wanting to understand it more. It really started becoming affluent to me that I was like, I actually really like cannabis. And, I really decreased on the drinking as well towards the end of my travel. And nowadays, you'd be lucky to get a beer out of me. But it's one of those things where when I returned back to Australia with my partner who I met overseas, she wanted to move back to the Sunshine Coast to do uni. I thought, well, what do I want to do as a career now? And at the time I had blown out my ACL over a 45-foot jump and done my MCL skateboarding. So I was in a pretty bad way. I couldn't surf, I couldn't run. I was in a very bad place. And I managed to reach out to someone that I'd met 7 years prior who helped me get a job. His name's Mick Carter, and he runs something called Beyond Clarity, which is a technology company. And he ended up saying, hey, look, I might have a job for you. So I ended up working for him for about a year and a bit, selling AI technology to businesses and trucking companies, which was really cool. And then we did some electric vehicle conversion stuff. But I still had my eye on cannabis. And because I'd known that the cannabis industry had started here medicinally in 2016, I knew there were companies out there. I knew that there were a few products around the place, and that if I hustled hard enough, I could get a foot in the door. So from telling my boss, Mick, going, hey, look, I really want to get into the cannabis industry, and he's an amazing mentor, and I still catch up with him regularly. He said, all right, well, get out there and put yourself out there and see what comes alive. And I was very fortunate enough to come across someone called Tom Brown from Honolulu, who gave me an opportunity to talk with him for numerous weeks about the industry and, how I might be able to get in. And he actually gave me a lead to an ASX listed company where I hassled them 4 weeks straight saying, hey, I would love an interview. I'm free today, tomorrow, and the rest of the year. And eventually persistence paid off, where I got an interview on the Friday. And I started work on the Monday. So that's when I did 18 months for that company selling, well, I guess I was a salesman, so a medical science liaison. And I went through the University of Tasmania to do my Medicines Australia course and all that sort of stuff. So, but what I was doing is I was talking to doctors every day, between 5 to 10 doctors a day about medicinal cannabis, about our endocannabinoid system, the products that we had, why they help, and, what the difference is between flower, oil, gummies, and all the rest of it. From there, I found that I met some amazing doctors who were super open to cannabis. At the same time, there were many doctors who had so much stigma against cannabis. And before we started the podcast, I told you about that doctor who, I mentioned to them that I rocked up into the clinic with the lunch and all my pamphlets, and she went, "What are you here today for? What are you going to talk to me about?" And I said, I'm here to talk to you about medicinal cannabis. And she goes, I'm never going to prescribe cannabis. I've been to Venice Beach and I've seen the homeless people. Speechless. I had nothing. And she grabbed her lunch and she walked away. I was like, well, you're welcome. It was insane. And, it got hard because there is that stigma. I don't think it is as much anymore, but there's still no training through the universities when people are doing their med grad and all that sort of stuff. There's no talk of the ECS system, but people are starting to understand it more. But it got to a point for me where I wanted to do something differently. I didn't want to keep talking to doctors, and I didn't want to keep driving around the place. And I was fortunate enough to be in touch with a doctor who ran a small cannabis clinic on the Sunshine Coast. He saw what it was doing for people and he wanted to make it bigger. So we ended up working together, and I jumped on board and created Atlus with him. And now we've got a bunch of staff, we've got a network of doctors, and we're really seeing the benefits for a lot of our patients. And yeah, it's amazing. And that's my little story of how I got into the industry.
Fantastic backstory. Thanks for sharing that, Harry. Really insightful, and what a journey in terms of how you've come across medicinal cannabis. In terms of, for the listeners, what are the uses for medicinal cannabis?
For sure. So depending on your indication, there's a wide range of indications that the TGA approves medicinal cannabis for. So it ranges from cancer, CNIV, so cancer, nausea, induced vomiting, chronic pain, epilepsy, arthritis, IBS, IBD, depression, anxiety, a few sleep indications, and there's a whole wide variety as well, because we're working towards is your endocannabinoid system. So depending on the indication that you have, there's obviously something going on with your ECS system. Now, your ECS system it creates homeostasis in your body. So it's about balance. And when you think about your endocannabinoid system, think about what you're putting into it from the cannabis plant, which is phytocannabinoids. And that's what the receptors, so the receptors are called CB1 and CB2. Those receptors are either being an agonist or an antagonist to the phytocannabinoids, which are then either blocking signals or redirecting signals. And that's how you get that benefit from cannabis. So if you're looking at mental conditions, you're looking at CBD products, because anything to do with the mind, you don't want to increase the heart rate to make the mind race, right? So you look at CBD products, you can get CBD isolates, which means that there's no THC or under 0.3% of THC content. But then if you're looking at pain, you need that THC, because that's what the main ingredient is to be able to help with blocking pain. But all in all, having the full spectrum of CBD, THC, and there's another thing called terpenes can really help a range of indications that your ECS system controls, because your ECS system controls your mood, your sleep, your appetite, and your overall health.
Wow. So could certainly be what I hear. It's really beneficial for the gut conditions, such as you mentioned, irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel
disease.
Yep. So and that's that very much that mind gut axis, right? It's
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's when you think about, say, alcohol, and we'll use that one. If you think about your body rejects alcohol, so that's why we get alcohol poisoning, right? It's when you look at cannabinoids, you're looking at something that your system actually wants to hold on to, which is why when it comes to drug testing, they're looking for what's in your system rather than impairment, because anything that is cannabinoid is going to stay in your system for at least a week minimum, depending on the type of user you are. So there's a lot around it with why I think cannabis will become a very big, important player in the health industry, especially as we move forward.
Just, I know probably some listeners are thinking at this point, well, if I'm taking medicinal cannabis and I get pulled over for a random drug test, is there a certification the doctor provides that to let the drug tester know that there'll be cannabinoids in the system, or how does it work?
Yeah, and that's where our system, at least our driving system is flawed, right? So as a medicinal cannabis patient in Northern Territory, WA, SA, Queensland, New South Wales, and Victoria, if you get pulled over and you do a drug test and there is THC in your system, so it's not CBD, they're just looking for THC, then you can be fined. Now, depending on the cop that you get, if you show them that you have a medical certificate, that you've got a script, and all the rest of it, that this is my thing and I'm not impaired, then they may let you go, but that's not a promise. If you had a really harsh cop who had stigma to cannabis, they could go, no, it doesn't matter, and then they can take you to court and you could lose your license. But what we're finding more of is that a lot of judges now are throwing these courses out because it's clogging up the system. It's a medical patient. These laws need to keep up. So, for instance, if you live in Tasmania, if you're a medicinal cannabis patient, you live in Tasmania and you get pulled over for a drug test and you show THC in your system, but you're not impaired, depending on the police's judgment of what they believe is impaired or not, you can actually be free to drive. They've been doing that now for over a year, almost 2 years now, and there has been no increase in drug driving related crashes, so it's obviously working. We've got a little guinea pig state that seems to be doing really well. So we're hoping Queensland, New South Wales, because they're the top two medicinal cannabis states, hopefully they can catch up and we can move forward. So we'll see how it plays out.
And so if a patient's taking the THC for pain, right, because you said it's very good for moderating pain, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So, and the doctor obviously gives some advice around it. If you're taking the THC for pain, you shouldn't be driving such and such many hours after taking it, right?
Correct. All of that information is given to patients. But at the end of the day, for a lot of patients, they either run that risk or they go back to opioids. Now, depending on the person, they might have already had a bad experience with opioids, or they know someone who has gone down the opioid path and it hasn't turned out well for them. So, you're putting someone in their place going, do I run the risk of getting pulled over and getting caught, even though I am getting something that is deemed medical? Or do I go back to something that is going to create more illnesses or lead me down, a bad path? It's such a strange system that we put people in, that they have to think about their health for driving.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Totally agree with you there, Harry. And in terms of the other conditions that you mentioned, were very much focused around the mind. So you mentioned epilepsy, anxiety, lack of sleep, insomnia, essentially.
Yeah.
In terms of, you've had an experience with it, and you said you slept better. Is it something that a patient needs to take on like every night? They take so much small dosage every night to help that sleep, or is it something that someone goes on for a period of time and then their sleep corrects itself? How does it work?
For sure. So when you're looking at cannabis as a therapy, it's more to do with dosing and titration. So all your doctors and your authorized prescribers will give you a dosing diary which means that you'll start at a very low dose and then you'll work your way up to your lowest therapeutic effect. So we're not trying to increase your cannabis use as much as we can. We're actually trying to keep it at a very steady level so that you can find what works for you. We've got patients who say they have a bad night's sleep. The next night they'll take their CBD oil for the next 4 or 5 nights, and then they might come off it for a few days and they'll find that they're okay. We have other patients who can't go without it and they need to do that. Otherwise, their pain is so high that they need to take a CBD to be able to help them with their quality of sleep during the night. So it varies on patient to patient, and obviously no product will give the same patient the same outcome. So because of our ECS system, everyone's, experience with cannabis is going to be very different. So it's a bit of trial and error when it comes to products and understanding which type of cannabis product will work best for you, but it's understanding that your doctor is there to be able to guide you on that. You also build up a tolerance to cannabis, just like we build a tolerance to alcohol, right? So with the tolerance, you take tolerance breaks. That's something that your doctor should be advising you on. So, it can be maybe 1 day out of every week that you're having a tolerance break. It could be 2 days every fortnight. It could be a week every 3 weeks that you take a tolerance break. It depends on the type of indications that you have and how long you may be able to go out with medicinal cannabis to reset your endocannabinoid system to then come back at a low dose and then titrate back up to your lowest therapeutic effect. So there's a few little nick and knacks in there to be able to find what's going to work best for you, but it's all about finding your lowest therapeutic effect and making sure that it's actually helping you.
It's very much what the naturopaths are trained in terms of the law of minimum dose. So
exactly.
It's very aligned to natural medicine.
Yes, I love all the naturopaths here on the Sunshine Coast. I know quite a few of them. And honestly, it'd be great if they could prescribe as well because, they just have a wealth of knowledge.
Absolutely. In terms of the side effects, like if I look at, if someone's not sleeping, they're either on melatonin or most likely a melatonin or some herbal supplements. Now, the melatonin, it really gives a lot of patients side effects, and essentially they wake up drowsy and they feel tired and they really struggle to get going. I mean, they get knocked out with the melatonin dosage, but how does CBD compare? Is there side effects like similar?
Yeah, so with any THC CBD product, whether you're taking a balanced ratio, a high THC, low CBD, or a high CBD, low THC, there obviously are going to be effects. Some of the negative effects can be drowsiness and dizziness, depending on how much you take. Dry mouth is obviously a big one, but some of the cliches are obviously still there. But one of the big ones that we always ask patients about is that, if you have a history of psychosis, then that's something we need to know about because high doses of THC can unmask schizophrenia. So that's a big red flag that we need to make sure that we understand that from all our patients. Because if we don't and we put them onto a THC product and it is high THC, there could be a case of schizophrenia there. So there are precautions that need to be taken. Also, if you're breastfeeding or if you have cardiovascular disease, these are the things that we need to understand to make sure that we can provide you with the best product because sometimes a flower, so I'll quickly run through a couple of the products for you. So there's flower, which is what you inhale. You then have oil, which is what you drop under the tongue. You then have 2 types of vaporization. So one is you vaporize the flower, which heats the flower to a certain degree, which you can then inhale. Or there's a oil vape, which is an oil that's specifically made to be put into a vape, which you push a button and that heats. And then there's sprays and gummies. When it comes to the effects of it, yes, there can be some drowsiness and everything, but depending on your dose, you shouldn't be waking up in the morning feeling absolutely tired or drained. What that means is then you're either taking too much, you've got the wrong dose, or you've got the wrong product.
And you mentioned appetite. It has an effect on appetite, and certainly from the smoking days, it's the munchies, right? So it's
yes.
So is that the THC, or does both the CBD and the THC can provide that munchies?
It's more along the lines of THC and the entourage effects, and terpenes can also play a part as well. So terpenes are the flavonoids or aromatic scent that you get. So if I break it down for you, if you were to smell like a juniper rind or a lemon rind or mandarin, that has a terpene called limonene, and that's naturally found in the cannabis plant. So what else is there? There's myrcene, which is good for sleep. There's linalool, which is found in lavender, and then there's caraphyllene, which is found in peppercorn. All of those terpenes are naturally found in the cannabis plant, and that's what actually creates the smell, the taste, and the look of cannabis as well. So you look at all the different strains around there as well, and all those different strains can have different types of terpenes in them. They'll have different percentages, and each one of those will then give an effect. So depending on the terpene profile that you have in, say, a sativa, it might increase appetite. Or you might have a different terpene profile with an indica, which might decrease appetite or not give you an appetite at all, but it might make you feel very couch bound. So for the difference between indica and sativa, indica is known commonly that it's a relaxing and sedative, and then your sativa strains are more of your uplifting creative. So if you think of, and I can use a perfect example here, Snoop Dogg, right? Everyone knows Snoop Dogg, well known. He would probably be using a lot of sativa because he's always moving and he's thinking and he's does a lot of stuff. He doesn't want something that's going to make him couch bound. So that's the easiest way for people to go, oh, so that's how Snoop does it.
Oh, wow. And in terms of like the listeners are probably thinking, oh, this is, sounds quite good. It could be a good alternative to my opioids for my pain or my melatonin for my sleep or for managing anxiety or managing IBS. So how do they connect with doctors that they know that's educated in this area and that can actually prescribe medicinal cannabis?
Yeah, for sure. So the best thing I find is you can talk to your GP about it, and that can be a little bit daunting at first because they might give the reaction, go, no, cannabis is horrible, and they'll probably call it marijuana or weed or something, and that's a psychological effect. So if you ever talk to anyone in the industry, they'll always say cannabis and flower because that's a new psychological thing to be able to promote that. It's actually a good thing. So, talking to your GP is always a good place to start. They might even be able to refer you to a clinic. So clinic is probably the best option because all the doctors at clinics have a very good education around cannabis products, ECS systems, and then the indications in which those products can then help. So a clinic like Atlus has a network of doctors who are all authorized prescribers and have a really good understanding of medicinal cannabis.
And in terms of, let's see, the doctor's educated, can prescribe. Does the doctor write a script and send it to, how does the flow work?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, for instance, the flow that we have at Atlus is you'll see a doctor, they'll write you a script. We have an in-house dispensary, which then that dispensary will receive a call from yourself to say that, have you received my script? They'll say yes, and then they can send your product to your door. It's a really simple service, and it's all done via telehealth now. I think COVID has really brought in the way of telehealth, and it's been really good for a lot of patients out there. Say who have anxiety, who don't really want, who can't even leave the house. They're like, how do I go see a doctor if I don't want to leave the house? So telehealth has really been a good thing, I think, especially for the cannabis industry. It's been rising month on month in patients who are wanting to try alternatives. So once you've then got your product, you'll have repeats, which your dispensary can then dispense to you again. And then you get follow-ups your first follow-up will be a review in about 2 months. And then from there, it's every 4 to 6 months that you get reviews from then on. So there is a very big patient-centric approach to when it comes to medicinal cannabis, because you may have to change products every 6 months or every 4 months, depending on the type of user and type of indications that you have. But it's about understanding that your doctor is there to be able to provide you with the best possible service to make sure that you're on the right products for your indications.
And is it listed on the PBS, the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme?
Unfortunately not. There's only two cannabis products that are. One's called a namixable, which is a bit of a handful. And then I can't remember the other one, but they're both sprays. And I believe one is a synthetic and the other one isn't. But at the same time, they cost around $400 or $500 anyways. And I just see that when it comes to what the industry is doing, we need laws to change. And then what we can do is be able to provide growers with more boutique grows to then bring the price down. And then we want to look at putting it on the PBS. If you do have private health insurance, there are a few out there that can cover the cost of the actual product, or it might be a percentage of the product. So if you are looking at changing private health insurers, ask them, be like, hey, do you cover medicinal cannabis products or the actual consultation? And they'll be able to advise you. I know that Bupa don't. I'm with Bupa, so they don't. Might have a chat with them after this.
Absolutely. They might be in touch with you after this.
Yeah, they could be like, oh, no, we do. Well, finally.
And but before I ask for your concluding words and thoughts on this whole medicinal cannabis conversation, I'd love you to share with how the listeners can best connect with you, because I know you've got a network of doctors that are obviously very much on board with medicinal cannabis. And so if they don't have a doctor or know a doctor, then obviously going to your website or contacting you, connecting with you would be a good avenue.
Yeah, for sure. So our website is www.atlus.com.au. I'm Harry Baird, Baird. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram. So if you do want to follow me and you have a couple of questions, obviously I am not a doctor and I can only give you advice, but I can't give you direct information. But yeah, happy to have a chat. And yeah, if you're a person that wants to have a bit of a chat, or you're an organization in the health industry and you have clinicians, or you work with osteos, or you work with even social workers, I'm more than happy to have a chat about medicinal cannabis, talk about the laws, and just to be able to give everyone a better insight into what's actually happening. Because you hear on the news that, especially at the start of the year, there was a lot of miscommunication from the media, which is shocking. But they said that you could buy CBD over the counter at the start of the year. And I don't know how many pharmacies I had calling me saying, hey, can I get this product now? And I said, look, what has happened is the TGA has approved for companies to go through the registration of putting forward a product that could be a CBD over-the-counter product. It doesn't mean there is one. So it's just crazy.
Yeah, that misinformation, the media loves grabbing headlines and just shooting them out there and sending Twitter alerts and getting everyone all excited. It's
exactly. Yeah, it was a bit of a crazy week. But then once people realize, oh, right, I can't actually get anything. But yeah, happy for people to reach out and have a chat with me.
Absolutely. And for the listeners, I'll include those links in the show notes. So just go straight to the show notes and there'll be direct links that Harry's mentioned. And Harry, your concluding words about medicinal cannabis.
It's a very bright future. I'm looking forward to what the next 5 years bring. I'm hoping that the laws change sooner rather than later. I hope that there is more education in universities, and there are a lot of amazing people with the industry who are doing the same as me and above and beyond. And I look very forward to seeing what happens. I look forward to seeing what the future holds for Atlus. And yeah, I hope anyone who is using medicinal cannabis is having great benefits. And I wish you all well on your journey.
Fantastic concluding words there. It just reminds me of a poster I saw in the train station, a big billboard. It was advertising Sydney Uni, and it had all these marijuana plants in the advertising, and it actually said changing the future of medicine. So essentially,
amazing.
Yeah, I thought that was good. So
that's very cool.
That shift is starting, that education starting. Advocates like you are doing an amazing job in terms of getting the information out there and educating others, educating doctors. And it's really about educating the public, which is why essentially you come on the podcast, right? You wanted to.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I wanted to get the word out there.
Fantastic. You're doing a great. Yeah, you're doing a great job of it, Harry, and I'll certainly spread it far and wide. This will obviously be on YouTube, TikTok, you name it, it's going to be there. So.
Thank you so much, Anthony.
You're welcome, Harry, and to the listeners, thanks for tuning in for another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. Appreciate you listening. If you know of anyone that may benefit from hearing this conversation around medicinal cannabis, particularly those that have any mental health ailments or gut ailments, or suffering any pain, please share it with them, because they could really benefit from hearing what Harry's had to share about medicinal cannabis. So thank you. Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. Me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information.
To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast, and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages, or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health.